Hello, I'm Dan Perry and welcome to my Masters of Science dissertation, The Hiding Curriculum Towards the Development of LGBTQ plus Curriculum in Higher Education, Chapter 1. It's about time, LGBTQ plus Curriculum Development in Higher Education, the Curriculum and Curricular as Chronobiopolitics. This is a final presentation in the first chapter, and it's called Time Equals Money, Curriculum, Curricular, and Chronobiopolitics, which is quite a mouthful. I've realised whilst doing the presentation I've not explained at least one of the concepts I use. However, because this dissertation's kind of a bit octopus-like, I'll explain it in the next tentacle presentation for the next chapter, as we delve much further into economics and even more concepts. So without further ado, we'll move on. So as this is not part of the actual timeline, we've got an overview. We first look at the etymology of curriculum and curricular, followed by a brief note on time, and then we delve deep into chronobiopolitics, and finally I explain what I've attempted to do in this chapter. It might be a bit lengthy, this presentation, but I'll try and get through it at a fastish pace. Alright, so I first want to define the words curriculum and curricular in relation to etymology, the meaning of words, before I discuss chronobiopolitics and how this relates to this part of the chapter. In the Barnhart Dictionary of Etymology, 1988, curriculum is defined as curriculum, it's a noun, 1824, borrowing of New Latin, and in brackets 1633, from the University of Glasgow, ironically, or not, from Latin, from curriculum, which means a running, course, career, and is from the Latin, and excuse me if I'm saying this wrong, currere, which is to run. Whereas curricular is defined as an adjective, 1798, and having to do with the driving of carriages. Formed in English from Latin curriculum, brackets race, and then course, plus English AR as a suffix, the transferred sense of having to do with the school's curriculum is first recorded before 1913, about 1909 in Webster. So hopefully you've got that. But the first thing one notices in the description of curriculum and curricular are the years 1633, 1798, 1803, 1909 and 1913. And they're not presented in a linear fashion, and as a result could be said to queer chromonormativity. And if you don't believe me, you can rewind to the last slide and look at it again. These dates do not follow in any order, which makes it quite interesting. However, it's a minor point and not the concentration of this part of the chapter. So we're just going to leave it there for someone else to pick up. What does surface in the descriptions is the idea of driving forward, running and courses, which would suggest a passing of time from start to finish. However, I would argue that it's much more than a simple running of course through time, as it's got human actors and is where the idea of chronobiopolitics comes into play. I realise as I'm doing this I might actually need to create another video to break chronobiopolitics down a bit further, but I'm just going to run with it at the moment, and you can let me know whether you think I need to do another video on it. But anyway, we shall continue. Friedman, 2010, states that we are living in a chronobiological society. This is explained as states and institutions of the state and their time-regulating structures that link temporalized bodies to movement and change. It could be argued that higher education and schools in general are an institution of the state that regulate time through curriculum. Temporalized bodies, i.e. students and staff, pass through the curriculum, which creates a forward movement that is either intentional or unintentional to change the actors, that is the student and staff, by the end of the course. And by temporalized bodies I'm meaning like our bodies in time, but again I might make a separate video to kind of try and explain this a little more easily. But as we continue, using Bourdieu's argument, Friedman 2010 supports the notion from Bourdieu that temporal time lapses are inherited through cultural competence and belonging to the point that they seem natural. Furthermore, Friedman 2010 agrees that Bourdieu seems to suggest that rhythms of time are not only achieved through repetition but are culturally and institutionally enforced. This could be read, for example, as classes in a higher education setting or university, which are generally structured as having semesters, holidays, classes, breaks. Within these classes, lecturing time, including lecturers' talking time, student talking time, discussion and activities in tutorials. The rhythms in higher education are created through both cultural norms, i.e. comfort breaks, and institutional regulation of time, for example when a class starts and finishes within the institution. These temporal manipulations become so natural that they become embodied within the student or staff member to the point where they become second nature. So we add a further layer onto this which gets slightly more complicated. But expanding upon this, Friedman 2010 explains that chronobiopolitics, that in chronobiopolitics, this embodiment of time goes beyond the individual person, but extends to entire populations of people. Further, that people's individual bodies are synchronized in time with each other, and by experiencing schemas which could be seen as a form of chrononormativity. I believe that this is where curriculum plays a part, because the classroom is made up of individuals who are in the same space, creating a population as such in a synchronized time regulated by their institution in a forward motion. So if you look at the image and imagine that those people are all together there in that one space all at the same time, and they're experiencing the whole thing together, both teacher and student. I hope that kind of makes sense from that image, and yeah, that's kind of what I'm meaning there. And obviously you're on a course, so you are expected to kind of go through some sort of progression from a beginning to a final point. But I'm digressing, trying to explain it a bit more easier. I'll continue now. However, chronobiopolitics is much more than just synchronizing populations in institutionally regulated time. Friedman continues that chronobiopolitics is linked to serving the nation-state's economic interests through timelines. This could mean that the nation-state views curriculum, a race course, the driving forward, as having to be economically productive. Friedman, 2010, classes education as not fully belonging to the nation-state, but still involves a practice of narrating state-sanctioned terminology in a non-realistic framework as an event or occurrence. So I guess here I'm sort of saying, I explain what state-sanctioned terminology is in a minute, but in a non-realistic framework, I'm guessing what I was meaning was that it's constructed rather than being a realistic framework. So some of what we've sort of said before, like class times beginning and ending, for example, because that is not a real framework. That is a non-realistic imposed framework as an event or an occurrence. So yeah, I'll move on to state-sanctioned terminology. In the case of curriculum, it would be terms like mission statement, curriculum, aims and objectives, and outcomes, and the expectation of some sort of transformation of student and staff by the end of the course, i.e. they've learnt some knowledge. The individual as an educated economic unit is not a new idea and was written about in 1961 by Schultz, who called it human capital. The focus of most universities is to give students skill-based learning to make them an economically viable unit in the workforce. Therefore, there is a logic of time being produced that has led to economic returns, either in the university or society, through the individual in general. This could limit what is approved curriculum by governing bodies. If it's not seen as economically productive, it may not be part of the final curriculum. This in part is because universities have moved towards a more neoliberal model of education that focuses on creating economically viable individual students, and we will explore this in huge amounts of depth in the next chapter. Whilst this could be seen as a positive outcome for students and staff, it comes at the cost of losing more creative, innovative flexible, imaginative and free-thinking approaches, which are also explored in the next chapter. In other words, because time equals money, or indeed time spent learning equals economic gain, curriculum can become restricted. So this brings us neatly up to the next chapter, which I'll discuss after this last little bit. But I want to explore what I've done in this chapter and just kind of give you an overarching look at the whole thing, because you might have lost your way slightly, but that is not necessarily a bad thing. And it is kind of supposed to be a little disorientating and kind of a bit hard, because that's how I was finding it when I was writing it, but more on that later. This chapter has explored the notion of time binding. That time is given social meaning through the embodiment of time. I've recognised that social meaning is embodied into a creation of LGBTQ+ curriculum development. As many scholars, activists and students have been involved in effecting changes. I've acknowledged that I have been a part of the process of chrononormativity, which is the creation and construction and regulation of time through creating a timeline. I further acknowledge that the timeline I've constructed is not complete at all, and it's not meant to be, and it's highly westernized, which is problematic and does need addressing by someone. There are likely to be disputes on why events occurred and when they have occurred, because that's what I was actually finding in my readings. Using Galziani's 2011 three time periods, this is the closet era, the coming out era, and the post-gay era, as guidelines, I've attempted to sketch the major developments in academia for LGBTQ+ studies. I've recognised that within these developments, administrators, students and community activists have played a part in its change. I've then returned to the etymology of curriculum and curricular and found in the definition a queering of time, so those dates being all out of order. This is because they're not listed in chronological time, which I've just kind of said, and seem to have multiple developments in differing timelines. They really do not make any logical sense when you actually look at them. But I digress. We continue. My main focus, however, has been on the definition of curriculum and curricular. I've found that they mean a race, a course, running, a driving forwards, which I have linked into time. Further, I've connected chronobiopolitics, that is, the synchronizing and embodiment of populations in economically productive time, to curriculum, and sort of have redefined it as that as I've kind of gone along. I've suggested, although this could be viewed as a good idea, it could be restricted by governing bodies who regulate higher education curriculums. In the next chapter, I will further explore the idea of economics, in particular neoliberalism and capitalism, in relation to homonormalism and the regulating of higher education. But before I do that, I really want to thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the first chapter. I hope it's challenged you a bit as well. As I said at the beginning, I think I'll probably do a tentacle presentation next, exploring some of the upcoming concepts in more depth. Plus, I mentioned human capital in this, which I will also be exploring in that because it kind of ties into economics a bit. So yeah, thank you again for joining me. I look forward to doing the next chapter, which is called Welcome to the Innovative World Order Coming to a Mainstream Near You, or Potential Ways of Resisting Normalizations in Higher Education. Again, thank you, and I will see you hopefully quite soon. Alright, bye.